In episode 62, titled Token and Session Attacks, we're focusing on why sessions and tokens become shortcuts for attackers, even in environments that believe passwords and MFA have the problem handled. Authentication controls are strongest at the moment you log in, but once a system decides you are trusted, it often issues something that represents that trust, so you do not have to authenticate on every request. That something is a session or a token, and it is meant to be a convenience and a performance improvement, but it also becomes a high-value target because it can carry access without repeating the original authentication. Attackers love shortcuts, and sessions are the ultimate shortcut, because they can turn "I cannot log in" into "I do not need to log in." The goal in this episode is to understand how sessions and tokens work conceptually, how they get stolen, how replay happens, and how to validate and report these issues safely. When you can reason about trust after login, you can explain many modern attack paths that never touch a password prompt. A session is best described as ongoing trust after a successful login, where the system remembers that you already proved who you are. The system typically gives the client a session identifier or similar handle, and the client presents it on subsequent requests so the server can associate those requests with the authenticated user state. This lets users navigate applications, access resources, and perform actions without re-entering credentials for every click or API call. Sessions can be implemented in different ways, but the essential idea is persistence of authentication state across multiple interactions. This persistence is valuable to defenders when it is controlled properly, but it is valuable to attackers when it is portable or easy to steal. The main security question is not, does the login work, but how does the system represent and protect the trust it grants after login? Once you see sessions as stored trust, you naturally start asking how that trust can leak. A token is similar in that it is proof used repeatedly, but the emphasis is on portability and repeated access to resources. Tokens are often used in APIs, distributed systems, and modern identity flows because they can be passed to services as a compact proof of authorization. A token may carry claims about identity and permissions, or it may simply be an opaque value that the server validates, but in either case, possession of the token can be enough to gain access. Tokens are powerful because they can cross service boundaries and they can be used from different clients if the system does not bind them to a device or context. That portability is a feature for legitimate use cases, such as service-to-service communication, but it is also a risk because a stolen token can be used elsewhere. For exam purposes, the simplest model is that a token is a reusable key, and whoever holds it can often act as the user or service it represents. The control question becomes, how hard is it to steal, and how easy is it to replay? Common theft paths explain why these attacks are so prevalent, because many real environments leak session identifiers and tokens in surprisingly ordinary ways. Insecure storage is a major one, such as tokens stored in places that are accessible to scripts, malware, or unintended browser contexts, or stored in files and configuration artifacts without proper protection. Interception is another path, especially when transport protections are weak, or when a user can be tricked into using an insecure connection, allowing session material to be observed. Logs are a classic leak path because debugging and verbose telemetry can inadvertently record tokens, headers, or URLs that contain sensitive values, and those logs often have broad access.
Browser leaks also matter because browsers store cookies and session data, and a compromised endpoint or malicious extension can harvest that material without needing to break server-side controls.
The unifying theme is that tokens are often treated as harmless strings until someone remembers they represent access. If you treat tokens as credentials, these theft paths immediately become more obvious. Replay is the concept that makes stolen tokens dangerous even when the attacker never learns the password. Conceptually, replay means the attacker takes a stolen session identifier or token and uses it to make requests as if they were the legitimate user. Because the system is designed to accept that token as proof, it often does not demand additional authentication, especially if the token is still valid and not bound to a specific context. Replay is also attractive because it can be quiet, often blending into normal traffic patterns if the attacker uses the token carefully. This is why session and token attacks frequently bypass MFA, because MFA is typically enforced at login, while replay uses the post-login proof. The defender's challenge is that if token reuse is permitted and monitoring is weak, the attack can persist until the token expires or is revoked. Replay is not about guessing, it is about borrowing trust that was already earned.
Session fixation is a different idea, and it is best explained as the attacker forcing a known session identifier so they can later reuse it. In fixation, the attacker tries to get the victim to authenticate using a session identifier that the attacker already knows, which means when the victim logs in, the attacker can potentially use the same identifier to access the authenticated session. This can happen when an application accepts session identifiers from untrusted sources, fails to rotate the identifier after authentication, or allows session identifiers to be set in insecure ways. The core weakness is that the session identifier is supposed to be unpredictable and controlled by the server, and fixation breaks that by letting the attacker influence which session the victim ends up using.
In a secure design, the session identifier should change after login so that any pre-login session handle cannot be carried into an authenticated state.
Fixation is a reminder that session management is not just about secrecy, it is also about lifecycle and control of identifiers. When you evaluate fixation risk, you look for whether the application reissues session identifiers at key transitions.
Weak expiration and poor revocation increase risk drastically because they extend the window in which stolen trust remains usable. Expiration is the natural safety boundary. A short-lived token limits how long replay can succeed, while a long-lived token turns a temporary leak into a lasting compromise. Poor revocation is the operational problem where the system does not invalidate tokens when it should, such as after logout, password change, MFA reset, or administrator action. If revocation is weak, the attacker can continue to reuse a stolen token even after the user believes they have ended the session or secured the account. These issues are especially dangerous when tokens can be refreshed automatically, because the attacker may be able to maintain access without any new user interaction. From a risk perspective, long-lived, non-revocable tokens behave like permanent credentials, which defeats the purpose of strong initial authentication. This is why lifecycle controls are as important as storage controls in token security. Consider a scenario where logout fails to end access because it is a clear signal that session handling may be weaker than users and stakeholders assume. A user logs out of a web application and believes the session is ended, but the same browser or an attacker using a copied token can still access protected endpoints afterward. The clue is that the system's concept of logout may be superficial, such as clearing local UI state without invalidating server-side session state or tokens. Another possibility is that the system uses long-lived tokens that remain valid until expiration, and logout only removes the token from the client without revoking it on the server. In either case, the practical risk is that session termination does not reliably reduce exposure, which makes replay attacks more durable. A safe inference is that token revocation and session invalidation are not enforced consistently, and that the system relies too heavily on client-side behavior. This scenario is often enough to justify remediation because it maps directly to a control gap that defenders can fix. Mitigation ideas should focus on reducing theft opportunities, reducing replay value, and improving lifecycle controls so that a stolen token is less useful. Secure storage is foundational, ensuring tokens are handled like credentials and kept in locations that reduce exposure to scripts, logs, and unintended contexts. Short lifetimes reduce replay windows, which is especially important for tokens used in high-value sessions or high-risk environments. Rotation improves resilience by regularly replacing tokens so that older material becomes invalid, which limits the usefulness of stolen artifacts. Binding reduces portability by tying tokens to device properties, client characteristics, or contextual signals, making replay from a different environment less likely to succeed. These mitigations work best together because strong storage without lifecycle control still leaves long-lived replay windows, and short lifetimes without secure storage can still result in repeated theft. The goal is layered reduction of opportunity and impact. A common pitfall is focusing only on passwords while ignoring session handling because it creates a false sense of security when authentication appears strong. Teams may invest heavily in password complexity and MFA while leaving tokens long-lived, broadly scoped, and weakly revoked, which means compromise can still occur through replay. Another pitfall is treating token exposure as just a string leak rather than a credential leak, leading to insufficient urgency when logs or monitoring tools capture session material. It is also easy to overlook client-side persistence, such as cached sessions on shared devices, which can create access risks even when server-side controls are strong. This is why mature security reviews include session management as a first-class topic, not an afterthought. When you assess token risks, you are assessing whether the system's trust artifacts are protected as carefully as the login process. If the answer is no, the system is only as strong as its weakest post-login control. Quick wins often involve enforcing secure cookie flags and tightening token scope limits because those changes reduce common leakage paths and reduce the damage of reuse. Secure cookie flags can reduce the chance that session cookies are transmitted in unsafe contexts and reduce exposure to certain client-side access patterns. Token scope limits reduce what a token can do, so that even if it is stolen, the attacker's access is narrower and the blast radius is smaller. You can also tighten where tokens are accepted, such as restricting them to expected audiences or limiting them to specific services where feasible, which reduces cross-service reuse. Quick wins should be paired with clearer revocation behavior, especially ensuring that logout and credential resets invalidate active sessions consistently. These improvements are attractive because they are often implementable without redesigning the entire authentication system. In an exam context, look for answers that reduce portability and lifetime while improving revocation and storage controls. Reporting language should clearly show what the token enables and how it was obtained, because stakeholders need to understand impact without being overwhelmed by implementation details. You describe the observed behavior, such as a session remaining valid after logout or a token being accepted from a different context, and you tie that behavior to the risk of replay. You describe how the token was exposed, such as being present in logs, stored insecurely, or intercepted in a way consistent with the environment, while avoiding unnecessary sensitive detail. You then recommend controls that address the gap, such as stronger storage, shorter lifetimes, rotation, binding, and reliable revocation on logout and credential changes. You also include confidence statements and constraints, clarifying what was confirmed and what is inferred based on the observed evidence. Clear reporting makes remediation easier because it points to a specific control gap rather than implying a vague session security problem. The best reports treat token handling as a measurable engineering issue with concrete fixes. To keep the model sticky, use this memory anchor: trust, storage, theft, replay, expiration. Trust reminds you that sessions and tokens represent ongoing authorization and therefore must be protected like credentials. Storage reminds you that where tokens live determines how easily they can leak to scripts, logs, or compromised clients. Theft reminds you that tokens can be captured through ordinary operational paths, not just sophisticated attacks. Replay reminds you that possession can substitute for passwords and MFA if tokens are portable and accepted without additional checks. Expiration reminds you that lifetime and revocation determine how long a stolen token remains valuable to an attacker. With that anchor, you can reason quickly about why token attacks work and what controls reduce them. To conclude episode 62, titled Token and Session Attacks, remember that post-login trust artifacts often become the easiest path for attackers because they bypass the most visible authentication controls. Sessions and tokens are designed to make access smooth, but smooth access must be balanced with protection, short lifetimes, and reliable revocation to reduce replay risk. Fixation, theft, and replay are all different ways of turning someone else's trust into my access. And weak expiration and revocation make that access last longer than it should. If you want one control that reduces replay, prioritize short token lifetimes combined with reliable revocation on logout and credential changes, because that directly shrinks the window in which stolen material can be reused. When you pair that with secure storage and tighter scope, token attacks become harder to execute and easier to contain. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.